Good morning. They say that better late than never. It was intended that I should be presenting this material 52 weeks ago. Unfortunately, not long before that appointed time, two goats met. One goat had managed to get his chain hooked around a fallen branch. The second goat felt that the first goat needed some help. The second goat's wife was telling him what a goat he was for trying, but nevertheless, being the stubborn goat that he is, he went up the hill and managed to succeed in extricating the goat from his predicament. Now, the second goat's wife was at the foot of the hill with some apples in her hand, which she intended feeding to the goat, and the goat, realising that she was there, took off. Sadly, the rapid movement of the goat upset the equilibrium of the second goat, and he managed to fall flat on his face, causing some injuries which required a trip to the Maroondah Hospital, and they kept me there for a couple of days, and thus I had to forego the privilege of speaking to you on that time. So here we are. Now, which of these villains do you think may have a message for us this morning? You have quite a range to choose from, don't you? From Nimrod, the mighty hunter against the Lord, to our latest smart aleck, Vladimir Putin. Any guesses as to who the chosen one may be? Any takers? Nero. Good choice, but not the right one.
Your World War II favourite?
Sorry?
Your World War II favourite?
Adolf Hitler. Yeah.
Pope Leo?
Sorry?
Pope Leo.
Pope Leo. I think Martin Luther would be most upset if we were to choose Pope Leo. Now, what could Napoleon Bonaparte possibly have to say to us this morning, or to anybody else of value? After all, we usually put him in the group of nasties trying to prove Daniel's prophecy wrong. They shall not cleave. I'm going to make them cleave. Well, I think you might be just as surprised this morning as I was when I found the material I will present to you. To understand this amazing man, we must look at the time in which he lived. He was born on the 15th of August 1769 to a family of Italian nobility in Ajaccio on the island of Corsica, which had just been ceded by the Republic of Genoa to France. His father, Carlo, fought with the Corsican resistance to that transfer until their defeat. And yet, in 1777, he was appointed as the Corsican representative at the court of Louis XVI. His mother was quoted as being, quote, a restraining influence on a rambunctious child. Later in life, he would say, the future destiny of the child is always the work of the mother. And I don't think anybody will argue with that one. In 1778, the family moved to mainland France, and at 10 years of age, he had to begin to learn the French language. In May the next year, he transferred with a scholarship to the military academy at Brienne-le-Château. Clearly, he was a fast learner. But he never lost his Corsican accent, and he couldn't speak the languages fluently as his classmates. He was bullied as a result. Then he graduated from the École Militaire in Paris in 1785, the first Corsican to do so, with the rank of second lieutenant. His ability saw him rise quickly through the ranks, being made a lieutenant colonel in 1792 at 23 years of age. This was, of course, during the French Revolution. And at that time, he was an ardent supporter of the Jacobin Party. Not much of a recommendation to our thinking. The Terror finally ended with Robespierre and his gang going to the guillotine, as an estimated 17,000 others had before them in the 2 years that the Terror lasted. You can do the maths on that one. But the troubles for France were not yet over. A strong royalist movement sought to restore the monarchy. Things came to a head on October 4, 1795, when their forces, variously estimated at between 20 and 40,000 men, invaded Paris to storm the convention. They were met by government troops, part of which were led by young General Bonaparte. He ordered cannon to be used, loaded with grape shot. Imagine a shotgun cartridge to fit the cannon. 1,400 royalists died, the rest fled. Napoleon Bonaparte was now unstoppable. At this point, we need to step back a little to understand the international situation. At the start of the revolution, thinking people around the world had a great deal of sympathy for its high aspirations of liberty, equality, fraternity. But as France descended so rapidly into the horrors of the Terror, the surrounding nations saw France as an enemy of everything that was right and decent. King Louis and his queen had been sent to the guillotine. Were all the other royal families under threat? And the Directory, which now took the reins of power, was little better than its predecessors. Professor R.M. Johnston of Harvard University describes the situation well. With the Directory, the revolution enters its last phase, and with that phase, all readers of history connect certain well-marked external characteristics: extravagance of dress, of manners, of living; venality and immorality, unblushing and unrestrained. Not a very pretty picture, is it? He goes on. The period of the Directory is that during which the political men of the revolution, with no principles left to guide them, gradually rot away, while the men of the sword become more and more their support and finally oust them from power. So, the nations of Europe declared war on France. And it is Napoleon Bonaparte the nation turns to. He is sent to lead the army in Italy, where his inspired leadership leads to a quick defeat of the Sardinian and Austrian forces there. He then leads his forces on across the Alps to within 100 kilometres of Vienna, and the Austrians sue for peace. In 1798, he sends his second-in-command, General Berthier, into Rome to take the Pope prisoner, thus fulfilling the prophecy of Daniel, that at the end of the 42 months, the little horn would receive a deadly wound. His bosses in Paris decided that it was now time to deal with England, but he wisely opposed their plan for invasion as impracticable. Notice the tunnel under the Channel, didn't become reality for another 200 years. He proposed instead an attack on Egypt, which would enable France to control the trade with the East and separate England from her colonies there. This suited their thinking because already they were getting nervous of this man's growing power and ambitions. And it is in this campaign that two surprising factors emerged. First, included in his army was a corps of 167 scientists and scholars. One of their discoveries would be the Rosetta Stone, leading to a breakthrough in the translation of Egyptian hieroglyphs. Second, on landing at Alexandria, he addressed his troops. The peoples we will be living alongside are Muslims. Their first article of faith is, "There is no other God but God, and Muhammad is his prophet." Do not contradict them. Treat them as you treated the Jews, the Italians. Respect their muftis and their imams as you respected their rabbis and bishops. Have the same tolerance for the ceremonies prescribed by the Quran for their mosques as you had for the convents, for the synagogues, for the religion of Moses and that of Jesus Christ. The Roman legions used to protect all religions. You will find here different customs to those of Europe. You must get accustomed to them. The people among whom we are going treat women differently to us, but in every country, whoever violates one is a monster. Pillaging only enriches a small number of men. It dishonours us. It destroys our resources. It makes enemies of the people who it is in our interest to have as our friends. The first major battle of the campaign was the Battle of the Pyramids, a decisive victory for the French. But 9 days later, Lord Nelson's Royal Navy fleet found the French fleet at anchor in Aboukir Bay and destroyed it. Only 4 ships escaped. Napoleon was now effectively marooned in Egypt. Undeterred, he made himself ruler of the country, despite some opposition from the locals, and proceeded with his plans. But, cut off from home base, with his soldiers suffering from plague and the Ottoman Empire now opposing him, he realised that he could do no more. And the news from France was that the Directory was failing. It had lost the confidence of the people. France needed a saviour. So on the 23rd of August 1799, Napoleon and a select group of his officers boarded the frigate Muron and with his 3 other remaining ships ran the gauntlet of the Royal Navy. They made it to Corsica on the 1st of October, then reached France 8 days later. He was welcomed as a hero. And the rest, as they say, is history. But it was on this voyage that another facet of this man's thinking was revealed. Reading from John Abbott's History of Napoleon, he devoted the hours to writing and study. His whole soul seemed engrossed in the pursuit of literary and scientific attainments. He also carefully and with most intense interest studied the Bible and the Quran, scrutinising with the eye of a philosopher the antagonistic systems of the Christian and the Muslim. The stupidity of the Quran wearied him. The sublimity of the scriptures charmed him. He read again and again with deep admiration Christ's Sermon on the Mount and called his companions from their card tables to read it to them, that they might also appreciate its moral beauty and its eloquence. "You will ere long become devout yourself," said one of his infidel companions. "I wish I might become so," Napoleon replied. "What a soulless Christianity must be to one who has an undoubting conviction of its truth." So, what was holding him back from that conviction? Abbott explains, the only Christianity Napoleon had seen in practice was the mummeries of the papal church, the fasts, the vigils, the penances, the cloisters, and the scourgings of a corrupt church. He once commented, "But how is it possible that conviction can find its way to our hearts when we hear the absurd language and witness the iniquitous conduct of the greater part of those whose business it is to preach to us?" There's a lesson for us to learn in that, isn't there? One evening, a group of officers were conversing together on the quarterdeck, respecting the existence of God. Many of them believed not in his being. It was a calm, cloudless, brilliant night. As they were flippantly giving utterance to the arguments of atheism, Napoleon paced to and fro on the deck, taking no part in the conversation and apparently absorbed in his own thoughts. Suddenly he stopped before them and said in those tones of dignity which ever overawed, "Gentlemen, your arguments are very fine, but who made all those worlds beaming so gloriously above us? Can you tell me that?" No one answered. Napoleon resumed his silent walk, and the officers selected another topic of conversation. We may dismiss his high-minded comments to his troops in Egypt, already quoted, as astute political expediency. But you cannot say that of this statement. He was for real. He reached Paris in October. On the 9th of November 1799, he led a coup d'etat dismissing the Directory and was appointed First Consul of France for a 10-year term. On the 25th of March 1802, England and France signed the Treaty of Amiens, ending 10 years of war. The French were so grateful that 6 weeks after it was signed, Napoleon was made dictator for life. Sadly, that peace would last less than a year. But then, on the 2nd of December 1804, Napoleon was crowned as Emperor of the French by Pope Pius VII. He then crowned Josephine as Queen. Are we confused yet? Only 6 years earlier, he had taken the Pope's predecessor prisoner. The answer is simple. Again, political expediency. Perhaps in reaction to the horrors of the terror, much of the population had reverted to the Catholic faith, at least nominally. So it made political sense to have their spiritual head bless his coronation. Had his power gone to his head? Perhaps. But let's not forget the good work he did at this time. His civil code, still honoured today, unified the laws throughout the nation and entrenched the principles of equality before the law, religious toleration and secure property rights. He established the metric system of weights and measures, which has since been adopted by most of the world. He also abolished the revolutionary calendar with its 10-day week. Alarmed by his growing power, not only in France but also the surrounding nations, Britain declared war again in May 1803. She would be joined by most of the other nations of Europe. Military action continued. More treaties were made and just as quickly broken. Napoleon seemed invincible on land, but at sea he could not match the Royal Navy. The Battle of Trafalgar, 21st of October 1805, saw Britain master of the seas. He now sought to consolidate his position in the manner forecast by Daniel. They shall mingle themselves with the seed of men. He had divorced Josephine in January 1810, 2 months after asking Tsar Alexander for the hand of his sister Anna. The Tsar declined. Anna was too young. She was 15. The Austrian emperor was a little more accommodating. His daughter Marie-Louise married Napoleon on the 1st of April. One is tempted to say that the date was appropriate. I am sure many look back to another Austrian princess named Marie and her sad fate only 17 years earlier. By 1812, Napoleon was master of a large part of Europe, estimated to be 40% of the population. But the relationship with Russia was turning a little sour. Napoleon's spies reported that Tsar Alexander was planning to reclaim Poland. Napoleon decided to act. On the 24th of June, he invaded Russia, and the Russians retreated, avoiding major battles but leaving nothing but scorched earth behind. They made a stand outside the walls of Moscow at the Battle of Borodino. They suffered 44,000 casualties. The French lost 35,000. The Russians retreated again, leaving Moscow in flames. Napoleon realised he was beaten. The Russians could keep on retreating just as long as he wanted. He ordered the retreat. But now it is coming into winter. Added to the freezing conditions, typhoid and other diseases ravaged the army. Of the 400,000 men who followed Napoleon into Russia, only 40,000 came back. And yet, he still had their loyalty. He was able to rebuild his army. But the writing was on the wall. The Allies began a campaign to get rid of him once and for all. On the 31st of March 1814, their forces entered Paris. On the 4th of April, Napoleon abdicated. 2 months later, he arrived on the island of Elba to begin his exile. The 12,000 inhabitants found themselves with a brand new second-hand emperor. He set to work in his new job. He created a small navy and army, developed the iron mines, oversaw the construction of new roads, issued decrees on modern agricultural methods, and overhauled the island's legal and educational system. He's quite a character. But back on the mainland of Europe, the Allies began squabbling amongst themselves again. Napoleon was well aware of this and the tactless behaviour of the new Bourbon monarchy. After only 10 months, he reasoned that the time was ripe for his return to power, and he was right. On the 1st of March 1815, he landed near Cannes with 1,000 men. He marched to Grenoble, with more joining him along the way. At Grenoble, the 5th Infantry Regiment joined him en masse. And on the 19th, he entered Paris to a tumultuous welcome. The Emperor was back. The Allies wasted no time in declaring him an outlaw and preparing to deal with him. In typical fashion, he decided to attack first and was initially successful. But at the Battle of Waterloo, June 18, his forces were defeated. On the 22nd of June, he abdicated for the second time. He tried to escape to the United States, but unable to break through the Royal Navy's blockade, he finally surrendered to Captain Maitland of HMS Bellerophon on the 15th of July. 4 months later, he and 27 loyal followers arrived on St Helena, 1,900 kilometres west of the nearest point of southwest Africa. He never left it. And it is here that we find our biggest surprise with this man. He maintained his tiny court with his followers, leading their after-dinner conversations, often on matters of religion. These conversations were recorded by another remarkable man. Henry Gatien Bertrand was a brilliant engineer in the army. In 1797, he met Napoleon, who quickly recognised his many talents and loyalty, promoting him to general and appointing him as his aide-de-camp. He followed Napoleon into exile to Elba and St Helena, much against his wife's will, by the way. She was the daughter of an admiral and liked the social life. But she went with him. He had developed a personal system of shorthand, which enabled him to record those 6 years in detail. On one such occasion, Bertrand challenged Napoleon with these words: "I cannot conceive, sire, how a great man like you can believe that the Supreme Being ever exhibited himself to men under a human form, with a body, a face, mouth and eyes. Let Jesus be whatever you please, the highest intelligence, the purest heart, the most profound legislator, and in all respects, the most singular being who has ever existed. I grant it. Still, he was simply a man who taught his disciples and deluded credulous people, as did Orpheus, Confucius, Brahma. Napoleon responded, I know men, and I tell you that Jesus Christ is not a man. Given the nature of the challenge, I think we are justified in adding the word simply into that sentence. According to Bertrand's record, he went on to speak for 30 minutes or more, which would make a great sermon in its own right, extolling the superiority of Christ and Christianity over all other religions, and the sublimity of the Bible, pointing to the fact that all human empires have been based on force. The empire of Christ alone is based on love. For a few moments more, let me share with you a few of those lines. Following on from his opening line, he said, superficial minds see a resemblance between Christ and the founders of empires and the gods of other religions. That resemblance does not exist. There is between Christianity and other religions the distance of infinity. I recognise the gods and these great men as beings like myself. They have performed a lofty part in their times, as I have done. Nothing announces them divine. On the contrary, there are numerous resemblances between them and myself, foibles and errors which ally them to me and humanity. It is not so with Christ. Everything in him astonishes me. His spirit overawes me, and his will confounds me. The gospel is not a book. It is a living being with an action, a power which invades everything which opposes its extension. Behold it upon this table, this book surpassing all others. I never omit to read it, and every day with the same pleasure. He concluded with these words, behold the destiny near at hand of him who has been called the great Napoleon. What an abyss between my misery and the eternal reign of Christ, which is proclaimed, loved, adored, and which is extending over all the earth. Is this to die? Is it not rather to live? The death of Christ is the death of God. There was silence for a moment. And then he added, if you do not perceive that Jesus Christ is God, very well, then I did wrong in making you a general.